we are all like part of the same fabric, and we really need each other.
We're in a shared ecosystem.
Yeah, exactly. And if, one part of that system is starting to crumble, like we have to figure out alternate ways.
Welcome, friends. I'm Kristen Merding, and this is Torches. Today we have the nuanced and provocative Aya Ogawa. Aya is an award-winning writer, director, and performer whose work premieres in New York City and then travels all over the country and the world. I'm very excited to speak with them today. Welcome, Aya.
Thank you so much.
Yay. So, how did you come to be in downtown performance?
It was kind of an accident because when I was in high school, I wanted to become an actor. It was around when I was 13 years old. I felt so drawn to theater, even though I had not really seen any performance. It was a strange kind of urge.
Interesting.
Yeah. And I think, I don't know if this makes logical sense, but the story that I tell myself is that, in my childhood, we moved around a lot. I was born in Tokyo, but we lived in Houston, Texas. We lived in Atlanta, Georgia, back to Tokyo, and then different cities in California. And I always just felt like an outsider, like never at home, kind of always estranged from my environment. Mm-hmm. And I struggled to kind of put myself out into the world because I didn't know, what I was supposed to do, how I was supposed to behave, because so much of our identities they fit our context, or our context informs who we are. And because I was in a kind of constantly shifting environment, I really yearned for a place that I could call home, a place where I could just be myself and feel comfortable. Mm-hmm. Somehow I found theater, and through acting, like through playing other people, I finally felt that kind of groundedness and confidence in myself. I wanted to be an actor starting at the age of 13. My parents were very much against it, so much so that they would go behind my back and tell my drama teacher to stop casting me in the school plays.
Wow.
Which I learned many years later. But yeah, and so I went through college. I did focus on playwriting while I was also acting. And then when I graduated, I spent maybe 2 months auditioning in New York as an actor who was not in the union, and quickly discovered that there was very little for me to do. And I was auditioning for parts like Tibetan woman number 2 or sexy dragon lady. Like literally, these were the roles, right? And I was like, oh shit, this is why my mother was so against me going into theater, because she was like, you're going to spend your life playing maids and prostitutes. Is that what you want to do? And I remember saying to her when I was in high school, like, well, that, I'm going to make my own theater. So I'm not going to do that. I'm going to make my own theater. I didn't know what that meant at the time at all. But so essentially that's what I started doing. I was like, I'm going to be poor anyway. I'm not going to be poor playing these roles that I don't want to play.
Yeah.
I want to make work that's meaningful to me. So that's how it all started, really. And but I was a part of a theater company where I was like acting and directing and devising, and we were all learning how to like design and how to write a press release. It was kind of like my grad school experience.
I remember you did an early version of something at Here.
Actually, Here was probably one of the first acting gigs that I had in those days. And but then when I left that company in 2003, that was where I was kind of making a commitment to focus on my own work, my own devised or writing/directing work. And I was the first project I was working on was a take on Hamlet, actually. Mm-hmm. The character of Ophelia had always plagued me. I was like, what are we supposed to do with this character? Mm-hmm. A lot of her characteristics kind of annoyed me. But I feel like what was actually annoying me about her existence were things that I found kind of the same things that were plaguing me in my life as a woman, as an Asian person in a predominantly non-Asian context. Deconstructing those parts of Ophelia's character and setting them in a contemporary context became for me a way of exploring and exploding my experience, my cultural identity in a way. And I feel like when I was making that piece, I didn't actually have the language or vocabulary to talk about what exactly it was that I was doing. I was just doing it, you know? Yeah. You were the first person. You were the first person actually who like believed in that project. I don't know exactly. We never had a conversation about like what it was that you saw in it or wanted to encourage in it.
I think I saw a really unique voice and perspective, and that you were truly curious about identity in that piece. In a way, it was in all these different languages. It was all these different aspects of Ophelia's, like, she's kind of a cipher. Like, there isn't enough that fully fleshes her out. And I felt like you were like, she could be this, she could be this, she could be this. You were exploring this whole world that she inhabited, which is the world inside all of us, that complexity.
Yeah.
And it just felt very unique what you were exploring.
Thank you. Yeah, so I felt like I got a lot into that piece that I didn't even know how to articulate and analyze, you know. And looking back now, that was, you know, about 20 years ago, which is insane. Yeah, I see that piece very much as like an exploration of identity.
Amazing. What's an experience that is personal, political, or creative that has most shaped the person that you are today?
Yeah, it's hard to identify one. I think that I would have to, so when I was in 8th grade, I arrived at a school where they had a drama program, and this was my first real experience with theater. And my teacher, her name is Roz Goodrich Sanitas, she was one of those people who, you know, she wasn't teaching theater, she was teaching how to be a human being in the world. Oh my God, I'm gonna get emotional. And that was just so important to me at that time, especially as a teenager, and feeling like, well, this is the 80s, right? So it was things were just very hierarchical, I would say. And she was kind of one of the few adults in my life who treated her students like full human beings, you know, and not looking down on them, not talking down to them, really encouraging us to be ourselves and to explore all our own facets of who we were. And so that I really feel like our relationship gave me the footing that I needed to, and the courage to pursue what I wanted to do. And then all the other things I feel like that propelled me forward were obstacles,
Right.
Like I said, my parents were really against it. And, once I think my first several professional experiences in the theater were framed by really ill-intentioned men. So I felt like I was constantly pushing and fighting and clawing my path forward. And it wasn't what I wanted to do. You know what? If the path had been easy for me, if I had gone out and auditioned and got cast in really wonderful and rich roles, I wouldn't have become a downtown theater artist. I would have been perfectly happy being an actor. But it was just this fight, really, this clawing out of these situations that propelled me forward and propelled me to continue to create my own work.
Well, I think it's horrible that you had those experiences, but I'm grateful that you became a downtown artist that makes your own work because
Me too.
your voice is really extraordinary and we're lucky to have it.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah. There are also familial relationships that have had an influence on your work. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
I didn't really intend to write autobiographically. I mean, I think to a large extent, a lot of, our work or my work, even before explicit autobiography, in some way or another reflected where I was or what I was thinking about. But I often begin projects with a question. I don't necessarily have characters or storylines fully developed and in place. I'm not really after the story per se, even though story is very important to me. But I'm pursuing a question, and I was exploring what failure meant for a variety of different reasons. The first reason is that, I had a critic come and see a show and call it a failure maybe a dozen times in a review. And that was really kind of a shock to me. And it made me really consider what failure meant to me.
Yeah.
And I felt like I couldn't do it alone. I enlisted the help of many different collaborators, actor collaborators, other writers, designers, and posed the same question, like, what is failure? Tell me a failure story. What do you consider failure to be? And all of my collaborators were so generous in sharing their reflections on what failure meant to them. And this space that I had created by asking the question became a sort of like healing, beautifully vulnerable space. And it made me realize that we didn't really societally have a space where we can talk about failure, sit in the feelings of failure. It's often kind of used as like a stepping stone towards success, or it's always kind of framed as just it's just a one step towards something else, but if we don't kind of create that space to really reflect and digest those experiences, they kind of like sit in us and fester and then really become a part of who we are. And so anyway, in that exploration of failure, I felt the responsibility to, take the courage and kind of these storytelling techniques that I discovered with my collaborators and turn it inward and ask myself the same questions. And that's really when I thought about my father for the first time in maybe a decade. He had died in 2007. Actually, oh my gosh, yeah, it was even before Ophelia premiered. And that time, I mean, not to get into my personal life, but that was when right after Ophelia, essentially I got pregnant, and and that derailed my whole art making practice, which I can get to in a second. But because of the way my life was moving forward at a certain pace, once my father passed, I didn't really spend a lot of time thinking about him and his life, and what that meant to me. And this question of failure, when I asked myself, it kind of pointed in that direction. Yeah. And it was never something that I intended to do. It just kind of happened in an organic way. And so I scripted The Nosebleed after those reflections. And this was a play that really used my personal life as a canvas for reflecting on these experiences that we think of as failures.
You spoke about your collaborators when you were talking about that. You have a lot of people that you've worked with over multiple projects. What makes a collaboration truly generative for you? And how does working with the same people over time help you get to where you're going on the journey?
Yeah, I think a lot about Jeanette Yu, who's a lighting designer by profession,
but one of the best dramaturgs.
Yes, exactly. So I met her right when she got out of grad school, around 2006, 2007, I think. And a mutual friend of ours had introduced us. At that time, because I was so used to being a scrappy artist, like I did everything myself. I hardly worked with a stage manager. Designers would step in that final production moment for me, because friends would be like, you need help, you need someone designing lights, or you need, Right. But I didn't really, because I didn't go to grad school and all that, I didn't really understand what those relationships were, director-designer relationships. And that was the point at which I met Jeanette, and we just started talking. And not really about lighting, we just started talking about art making, the world, how we felt, where we were. And I was like, oh, I really get along with this person. So I'm going to bring her on board to design my lights. But as our working relationship developed, and because we had a kind of a friendship and a trust underlying our working relationship, we just started having these incredibly nuanced and explosive and so exciting conversations, artistic conversations. She would bring to the table things that I hadn't considered. And so her voice became just like something trusted, someone I always ask to read a play or come to a reading. Not because I mean, inevitably I will ask her to design my lights, but on some level, I don't need her extraordinary skill set. I don't have the budget sometimes, that right. She's incredible. She can do so much. I actually don't need her to do all the crazy things with the lights, right? But I want her brain in the room, and I want her thinking, reflecting on the thing that I'm trying to make. and she's kind of like a, like a real anchoring point in my art making. So that's an example of a collaboration that just is so necessary and critical in my making process.
How do you navigate power dynamics and conflict within collaborations?
I feel like that is something that is slippery and fluid, I have to say. I think that in all of my projects, I try to cultivate trust amongst the company. I want to make sure that my collaborators know that they can call me out on things if I'm doing something that's doesn't sit right with them, or feels counter to what I said I wanted to do. I depend on them to say, hey, you're not doing the thing you said you were going to do. And I really, really value that. At the same time, I feel like, we take care of each other by taking care of ourselves first, So I depend on people to be honest with me about where they're at. If they're not able to, do something that I'm asking them to do, that they need to say that, because I can't read their mind. So it's a two-way street. It's a lot of communication, and it's a lot of trust.
Could you share a moment of pure joy in your work?
There's never pure joy.
Oh.
I'm always like, oh, this is shit. I recently toured the Nosebleed, which, as I said, is an autobiographical play, and it's about being a child and being a mother, looking forward and backwards at these familial relationships. It's a lot also about my father and the kind of rift between us, a generational gap and also a cultural gap between us. And I had the opportunity to perform it in Tokyo to a Japanese audience for the first time ever. And I was really very nervous about how a Japanese audience would receive the piece, because I'd really made it for an American audience.
Yeah.
And by that I mean an American audience who understands a culture that is woven together by many different immigrants, a lot of different generations of people coming from different places. And I really did not know whether, without that context, the audience would receive the story. But then when we got there, I understood that they were seeing the piece in a completely different way, which is that the character of my father was someone that they recognized, who felt very familiar to them. And I'm gonna cry again. But that was also like, it was painful to feel that recognition in the audience, But because of that recognition, I feel like they received it in such a beautiful way, in a deep listening kind of a way.
And a different kind of empathy for him
Yeah.
than an American audience might feel.
Right. I just, a Japanese audience is not as vocal as an American audience. They are not, they don't laugh as much. They don't gasp or, speak back, not nearly as much as an American audience. But in this just deep, deep listening, and the breath of the audience, I could feel how much, how deeply the piece was hitting them. And that was joyful. That was that was incredibly moving and joyful to me. Yeah.
You mentioned before when you got pregnant, has becoming a parent changed your work?
Oh my God. I think that there was nothing as disruptive as having a baby. I mean,
I agree.
you have to, I I should have had so many more conversations with you about exactly this, because I don't know how you did it. I mean, how were those early years for you?
Well, some people have those kids they can bring to rehearsal.
Yeah.
I did not have a kid like that.
Uh-huh.
My kid, I could never do that with. So I did not have. Some people make it look so effortless and like they show up at rehearsal with their kid and they do their thing. And
Right.
that just was not my child.
Yeah.
My child. So I really had to very clearly separate my creative life from my family life. I couldn't thread those together. And so I just did. But I definitely directed less the first couple of years because I just didn't, with running here and a child, and like there just wasn't the bandwidth
My God.
to do all three of those
I
things.
can imagine.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I was the moment that I got pregnant, I was still working full time at a office job. I mean, it was like performing arts related, but
Right.
my life was like working 9 to 5 and rehearsing 7 to 11. Like that was the way I had structured my life to be sustainable. And I thought that's what I would just continue doing until I died. But when the baby came, I was like, oh, shit. Like, what am I doing? Because then the office job was barely paying for the childcare. Right. And then when I had to pick up my kid from daycare, I had to be with the kid.
Yeah.
Like, I wanted to,
Yes.
I wanted
Yes.
to be with my child. And so I think, I would say like for 10 years, I turned down jobs that would take me out of town.
Yep, I did that too.
Yeah. And it was hard, as much as I enjoyed my time with my kid, and I absolutely don't regret that time, it was incredibly difficult in the moment, feeling like, oh, I might not make a work of art ever again. Like I didn't feel like my identity as an artist was so just made invisible and
Yes.
mangled.
I do feel the field has improved since we had our kids.
Yeah.
I do feel like there are artist colonies now where you can bring a kid, or there are theaters that are now accommodating childcare as part of if you traveled there and housing your family as well as you. But that was not happening when we had our kids.
No, not at all.
Not at that time.
I mean,
No.
yeah, I think it was very much like you don't talk about it.
Yeah.
And as a result, like I didn't know who had a kid, and so I didn't know who I could talk to about that kind of stuff. It was really hard to persevere in that time. And so I spent a lot of years taking on more. So eventually I quit my day job so I could be a mom, and I took on more like translation work because that was still making money, still an artistic practice for me, and I could do it, whenever I had the time to do it. And that was the way I survived those early years. And now I just make plays about them as revenge.
Yes. That's what you get.
Yeah.
How have we were just talking about institutions and not providing support when you were first becoming a mother, but how have institutions supported or failed to support your work?
As a primarily or often, I end up self-producing or producing in collaboration with a presenter, and those partnerships are different from being produced fully by an institution. And I find that when I'm in control of a process or in control of the budget, I'm able to allocate how I feel is like fair and equitable and meets everyone's needs, hopefully as much as I'm able. And I often find that working with larger, fancier institutions, they already have so many categories in place that are probably dictated by the unions, that the organic way that I've created my work don't fit into those boxes.
Right.
And as a result, I end up having to like have a lot of fights about, why can't this person who has been on my project from inception go on payroll as this role,
Yes.
And so that's been really tricky and also painful.
I bet.
Yeah. So I'm still figuring out the balance. I mean, I feel very supported by play development organizations and residencies and the organizations out there who are like trying to cultivate and support artists in the development of work, but not necessarily producing. It's when I hit that production wall where I feel like the thorniest kind of questions come up.
So if you had one suggestion for a way that institutions should change, what would that be?
I mean, I personally would love to sit down and look at the budget with them instead of having them kind of dictate, how much we're going to allocate for set and all the departments. Like,
I'm so surprised that it's still done that way.
Yeah.
We never did it that way. We always developed the budget together with the artist to
Right,
assess
because-
their priorities. So why are institutions still doing that?
yeah, exactly. I think that, I think the difference is like if they're picking a project from a pile of scripts and they are assembling the creative team, their structure probably works for that model, you know.
Right.
But for someone like me who's kind of working in a different way or more organic way where like, whatever, like the my collaborators may not fit that structure,
Yeah.
then it becomes an issue.
Right.
So I wish I could have more of a say in how to structure a budget, for sure.
You've said you hate audience participation. How do you think about your relationship with the audience?
Yeah, I mean, the irony is that there's a lot of audience participation in my work, but I guess what I hate is audience participation for the sake of audience participation. I don't like it as a gimmick.
Yeah.
I don't like it as just a pure provocation. I actually view my work's relationship to the audience as very important, and aside from what I'm building on stage, I'm always thinking about how do I get the audience on board? How do I make them understand the rules and the tones and the worlds of this play, how to watch the play, essentially, and what is the journey that I'm taking them on, and where do I want to take them? I think that's a really critical part of my creative process. And so I'm always intentionally building that relationship. So yeah, even in rehearsal, in the rehearsal process, I like to have people come and watch, because actually that interaction is what will inform me and the piece.
Yeah, I remember you invited me to come to a very early version of the Nosebleed when it was still called Failure Sandwich, I think. And I remember we were scattered sort of like trees around the room, and the performance was happening all around us.
Yes.
And it was surprising and uncertain about where you focused when, and it was very exciting to be in the room that way.
Yeah, I really actually, that was my, I wanted the piece to be like that. But then COVID happened. Yeah, so then suddenly I was like, oh, I can't be in the round. We have to be safe and, separate the audience from the performers. Yeah. But yeah, maybe there's a version that that can happen again. Yeah.
Yeah. Mark Bamoudi Joseph recently asked, he was thinking about the state of the world that we're in right now. How do we create the conditions for artists to guide us forward to the other side of fear? Do you have thoughts about that?
I mean, I feel like I spend a lot of time in fear. The only way through it is through it, and experiencing it. And in a way, this goes back to when I was starting out as a young person, but having so many obstacles and challenges in the way forced me to be really intentional and precise with what I wanted to do and where I was going, and I had to kind of sharpen those skills in order to carve my path through it. But it's maybe a similar situation right now where we have to really focus on what is important to us and how can we step forward with that in mind. I mean, it does really feel like the ship is sinking in so many ways,
It does.
So are we gonna create our own boat? I don't want to be the last rat on this sinking ship.
Yeah. I do think we have to make our own boat. What would a truly sustainable artistic life look like?
Oh my God. We can only dream about this. I mean, I feel incredibly lucky to have support from my family. Now I feel like my art can support us. I just feel like community is so important in this question of sustainability. When I was really starting out as an artist, I was in an environment where when we looked at other artists, we saw them as competitors, right? Like, we're competing for the same grants, the same money, the same resources, the same, programming slots. And it took me years actually to really feel and embrace the idea that we are all like part of the same fabric and we really need each other.
We're in a shared ecosystem.
Yeah, exactly. And if, one part of that system is starting to crumble, like we have to figure out alternate ways to make work. So yeah, I just feel like an awareness of and respect for and compassion for community will make this art scene sustainable.
Thank you for that. Do you think that the spirit of downtown still exists? Is that related to what you were just talking about?
Yeah, it is. I feel like downtown has kind of been squeezed out of downtown to the outer boroughs. But those are the artists that I feel most excited by. Places like The Brick, places like Target Margin, who are still like doing weird shit. Like, I'm like, yes.
Totally. I just saw Normandy Sherwood and Nikki Kalange's piece, The Mushroom, at Target Margin. And it was just such a weird, wonderful world to go into.
So good to hear.
How do you define success as an artist now? And has that definition evolved?
I am allergic to that word success, and maybe that's kind of something I should revisit. But there's a part of me that's afraid to experience or actually feel success or actually feel or experience happiness. Like, do I really deserve it? And I think that's a lot of like the immigrant experience actually, because there's so much conditioning. When I came to this country, it was like assimilate, just keep your head down and like blend in and try not to, stick out, and don't want that much, be modest with what you ask for. But you can't make art like that, so I feel like I'm just making the art that I feel needs to be made, that I have control over, and that is success.
I want to hop back to your directing work, because you've made a lot of work that's fully Aya projects, but you also, in the same way that I think you talk about Jeanette being an important grounding for you, I think you've provided that grounding as a director to some artists that are earlier in their careers. And I think you've been really had a deep impact as a director on their work. Could you talk a little bit about what you find exciting about that work and why you've chosen to do that more recently?
Yeah, I actually never thought that it would be something I was interested in because, I mean, making a play, it's just so much. It's so much energy, so much thought and dreaming and resources, and it just takes so much out of you. Like, why would you do that for someone else, right? So for a long time I was like, oh, that's not for me. Like, I can't have that kind of relationship with someone else's work, but it was when I met Haruna Lee, and they approached me to direct a reading of their play, and I was like, come on, no, that's not going to happen. That's not going to happen. And I read the script, and I was like, oh, this is disgusting. Like, this play is disgusting and shocking, and then I don't know what I'm supposed to do with it, but I was like, out of courtesy, I had a meeting with them, and we just started talking. And it was one of those meetings, I mean, similar to my meeting with Jeanette in a way. We just started talking and kind of like resonating with each other as human beings and as artists. And then I was like, oh shit, now I have to direct this reading.
And you made an incredible world with Suicide Forest.
Yes, and actually to be not the generative artist, but to have that kind of one step outside and be able to look at the text in the play, that space gave me a lot of freedom to dream and make mistakes and kind of throw crazy ideas into the mix. And with the right collaborators, I feel like my directing work, directing of other people's work, has been a really inspiring branch of my practice.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great. Thanks to you for joining us today. Thanks to HowlRound for hosting. And we hope you'll come back to see more of Torches.